Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for JETRO Chicago's Jconnect Webinar Series. My name is Kevin Cowell, Business Development Specialist from JETRO Chicago, and I will be moderating the webinar today. Our topic is Smart Cities Mobility, and we're bringing you 3 companies from Chicago, San Francisco, and Vancouver to share their stories on how they're developing mobility solutions through artificial intelligence and big data to meet the needs of cities of the future. If you would prefer to listen to this webinar in Japanese, please switch for simultaneous interpretation in the bottom of your control panel, or maybe it is at your top. If this is your first time attending a Jconnect webinar, our focus is to help connect innovative North American startups to Japanese affiliated companies doing business here in North America, and most importantly, to facilitate business relationships between the two. Likewise, it aims to improve the productivity of Japanese companies and to help accelerate their open innovation strategies. Our Jconnect series focuses on a variety of industry and technology themes, and more information can be found on JETRO USA's webpage. Today's topic of smart cities and mobility is very timely, as cities around the world continue to grow in size, and new demands are created on outdated infrastructures not prepared to handle the strains of both population and economic growth. Japan is in the wake of a super aging society, a reality that many other countries have begun experiencing. Aging populations have caused complex social issues regarding mobility, healthcare, and workforce productivity. And smart cities in Japan are being touted as high-tech marvels where artificial intelligence and big data are going to be used to provide more efficient and cost-effective solutions to social problems. Society 5.0 is Japan's national vision that aims to realize a data-driven, human-centric, next-generation society, meaning that everyone, regardless of location, including the elderly population in rural areas, will receive the benefits of innovation and advancements in tech. Furthermore, Japan recently announced a Super Cities initiative where AI and big data would be used to manage a variety of areas such as transportation and logistics, payments, medical and nursing care, education, energy, environmental management, disaster control, and more. The opportunities for foreign companies to introduce new business models and technologies in Japan are going to be prevalent. I would like to now share a few housekeeping notes, as always, before starting the webinar. First, here's how to operate the control panel for questions. Your microphones are muted to avoid noises. For this reason, questions should be entered in the box labeled question in the control panel. You can also leave a question in the chat. You can vote up questions that you have interest in. All of the questions will be answered during the panel session after the 3 presentations have concluded. Today's talk will be recorded. Both video and handouts will be sent to you after the webinar, in which you will be asked to complete a survey questionnaire. Please note the simultaneous interpretation to Japanese is only available live. In the unlikely event that the webinar system shuts down for any reason, we will reboot the system for you. Please log in again for a few minutes using the Join Webinar button. I would like to now introduce our first speaker, Dinesh C., CEO and co-founder of Adapt, based in San Francisco. Adapt is a Silicon Valley-based company that has developed a patent-pending platform allowing any organization to easily catalog data and use AI in building new mobility and smart cities applications. Dinesh is a globally recognized thought leader and innovator throughout the mobility industry. And after beginning his career at IBM, he went on and found 3 successful startups that led to major investments and acquisition. Dinesh also teaches entrepreneurship at the University of California, Berkeley. Further bio and company information can be found for the speakers on the registration page. So Dinesh, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to you now if you're ready to go.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for having me. Let me see if I can bring up my screen. All right. I hope you all can see my screen.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. So first of all, thanks for organizing this, Kevin, JETRO. This is an amazing time, I think, to start talking about smart cities, which I will explain a little bit more about my experience on this. I think what I would try to do in the next 15 minutes or so is to explain why is it important to do smart cities and what it is that smart cities brings to people, basically the community of the world. Before that, let me give you a little bit more background about myself. As Kevin mentioned, I have been doing startup almost all of my time, global wise, and also teach entrepreneurship at UC Berkeley. In fact, prior to COVID, I used to travel to Japan almost every month. So yeah, I'm pretty, I know the route pretty well, which airline and the route within Japan, mostly Tokyo and Osaka. My passion is really about using technology, since I come from a background of computer science, to really help to improve lives of people. And that's why smart cities for me is pretty exciting. For those who are hearing in Japanese, you might find it strange that you're hearing a Japanese voice with my face, but actually it's not that strange because I'm very much connected to the Japanese community. In San Francisco, I'm also a board member of the Japanese Community Youth Council. It's one of the largest and oldest community serving youth and children. And annually, we serve about 7,000 people in the San Francisco Bay Area, with people from different backgrounds these days. On top of that, I also practice Kendo. Unfortunately, the past few months, I couldn't get much time to practice with people. But having said that, I've been practicing this for a number of years. It's a very good thing for me to maintain my stamina, refresh myself. But during these days, I've also tried to use it to practice with my 3-year-old daughter. Hopefully she can learn quite a bit from this. However, when we talk about smart cities, a lot of people might think about futuristics and things, but Star Wars is not that disconnected from Japan, because George Lucas actually brought the whole team to San Francisco dojo in the 70s to learn about how Kendo, and then it was transformed into the lightsaber fights that we see in Star Wars. So you can now see the connections why Japan is very much into the smart cities and the Star Wars. Now, enough of the Star Wars talk. Going back to smart cities, it's not just about smart cities. What we found in this 21st century is that as organizations, as citizens, even as countries, we need to start thinking about innovations. And innovation, not a one-time part. It is a continuous innovation. And we need to be able to adapt to continuous changes. We are in a really much needed limited time for both our resources as well as the support of our community. As Kevin mentioned earlier, that in Japan, we are also going through issues of aging populations. The need has completely changed. So for smart cities, it's something that we need to rethink what we are trying to do, and not just about, hey, improving a certain parts of it. So let's go back to what exactly smart cities is, and particularly in this part, the mobility side. When we think about smart transportations or mobility in the smart cities, it's really about serving the citizens of the cities. Things that we need to look after is like reducing traffic, road accidents, better navigations, better schedule, or even conditions of our roads. To do that, data has been a proven source of way to help us to really improve. However, the current way of accessing data is very limited and it's very disconnected. For any one of you who has been in that part of the world, you will find that it's very frustrated to spend a lot of time just to search for data and then to access them, eventually knowing that majority of data doesn't have good quality. The problem with this is very costly, and it also demoralizes people to start thinking about what improvements we can do. What we advocate and what we believe is important is really collaborations, partnerships among private organizations, partnerships among business and governments. And these partnerships is not just about, hey, I'm sharing the data or I'm doing an open data platform and give me some sort of data. It's really about the problems that we need to solve. Climate issues, traffic issues, air quality, energy that is pretty much trendy right now, especially in Japan with their open energy trade. And these are things that I really want both private and public organizations to start thinking about how we can work together. Now, when we think about transportation applications for smart cities, there are quite a few. And I'm sure today you will hear from Parknav as well as Spare on what they're doing on this part. But as summary, there is mobility as a service, smart infrastructures, energy and climate, as I mentioned, and also a collaborations platform. Now, I think we learned a lot about these smart cities in the past few years. Why organizations should get into it? The answer is very simple. One is, it's a huge market. So from a market point of view, there's a lot of studies in that. So monetary wise, there is a potential. But more importantly, is as organizations on the 21st century, it's really about helping to improve lives of people. And at the same time, allowing organizations to start transforming themselves. And this is the part that I really believe organizations should start thinking about what their role is in this smart cities applications. With COVID, we started seeing more and more companies coming to us and saying that we need support, not only on the standard smart city applications, but really about supporting their remote workers and also supporting people who needs to transit within this environment. So again, you can see that there is a huge demand coming in from really pushing for this kind of services. Let me share a little bit about what ADAPT does. So as Kevin mentioned, we are based in San Francisco, Silicon Valley. We focus on helping companies or helping organizations to leverage on the amount of data that they have, because most companies already have tons of data these days. Question is, what can they do with the data? And then bring AI into it. Right now, we are in a maturity where we can do a lot of things that we couldn't do in the past few years. And this is a very exciting time, I believe. As I mentioned, I've been traveling or working in Japan for quite a number of years, and we have started working on some projects ranging from helping cities to start developing their platform where they can collaborate with varieties of mobility companies as well as other organizations. We also start working with organizations that are trying to use their data to do some more analytics to understand where they can be with the data that they have. And finally, we are also working with insurance companies as well as automotive companies to start thinking more about the future of insurance, as well as what it means to be in transportations. As many of you know, transportation is no longer just buying a vehicle or getting into a taxi. It's really about getting from point A to point B and what is the best route in terms of cost, in terms of time, and these days in terms of energy. So these are some of the things that we work very closely with companies to help them to start making the right decisions, as well as to bring in some different partners. What we really bring into the table is really allowing companies and organizations to collaborate in a way that they have never thought about, that they could work together. So we work with companies like enterprises, cities, as well as developers. A lot of people, they don't realize that for any type of development work that needs to be done, you need good access to quality data. And that's where we come in to help organizations to manage their operations in terms of data, to help cities to start creating a better platform so that developers can be very innovative in creating the applications that allows our community to benefit. So in our platform, we allow any sort of data. Doesn't matter whether it's from a different source, the file type, or any of those. What we care about is really creating a single platform that makes it easy for people to access the right data at the right time. The platform is data agnostic, as I mentioned, and it allows for city planning to start looking at a holistic view. Where are my mobility services? What can I do better? Who can I partner with? If there is a car manufacturer and an insurance company and a mapping companies and let's say a logistics company, can I use those data to enhance our transportations? Can I reduce traffic? Can I do better planning? Those are kind of information that we provide directly on our platform. The key that we bring and we hope cities could be more used to is having the right intelligence. Again, going back to the point that as we are moving towards the 21st century, we need to be more effective in creating the right innovations and continue to adapt to changes that is happening to our society. A little bit more about what we do as a data, right? When you think about data, data is basically a bunch of numbers or strings in a file format or a spreadsheet. There's no phase to it. Unless you spend a lot of time, unless you have the right skills and you have the right tools, there's nothing much you can do. So think about it, if you are a city operator or if you are an organization that doesn't have the right resources, you're just sitting in a bunch of data out there. What ADAPT does is we convert it into a profile. We bring it into a way that automatically people can recognize what this data is about. We give a grading to it. And more importantly is we automate the coordinations or the collaborations between different data sets. Meaning that if you have different organizations that have different data sets, what we do is we bring them together, not only about bringing them together on the business discussions, but bring them together by telling them that they have the opportunities to solve these problems because of the data that they have. And this is where we start seeing more and more companies are excited about this type of collaborations. For majority of the organizations, of course, compliance, privacy, data access are the key. And these are some of the things that we ensure on our platform. So again, providing some sort of trust and confidence for people to start moving towards and transforming their business to be more data oriented. With my closing, I want to emphasize a few things. I know smart cities is still a big topic for a lot of organizations are still thinking about, should I get involved in it? How should I get involved with it? What do I know about smart cities? What do I need to do it? I know there's a lot of questions, and today's seminar, I'm sure you will have a lot of good information from that. But one thing I really want to emphasize is that smart city is not about a cool technology. It's not just about Star Wars. It's not about futuristic cities. It's really about responsibilities. It's about collaborations. And it's really about a shared purpose. A purpose that this city, this country, and this world belongs to all of us, and it's our responsibility to ensure that we can have a good management of our resources. And that's what, to me, smart cities is about. And I hope to continue to work with some of you to enhance the places that we all live in. Thank you very much.
Dinesh, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for bringing Star Wars in. That makes my day.
Thank you. Well, you guys can come in. I think there's a Yoda statue in San Francisco.
Okay. So I'm going to start a poll here if I can find it here on my screen. So just give me a second here. Where is it at today? Just one moment here. I am not seeing my poll. So I'd like to remind everyone to go ahead and keep putting in questions to the Q&A. If you can please do that. I know we've had a couple come in. And I was going to start a poll here, but I'm not finding it for some reason today. And I don't know why. Here it is. Okay. You should see this pop up on your screen here. So as you take that poll, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Jeremy Laval, Vice President of Product and Marketing at Parknav. Based here in Chicago, Parknav uses artificial intelligence to generate open on-street and off-street parking in real time. It offers a scalable solution that uses zero hardware and works for every street in a city 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Jeremy completed both undergraduate and graduate degrees at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and after spending some time with Target Corporation, began a startup called College Rides. Jeremy began with Parknav in 2013 as its third employee, and he has helped to grow the company to over 50 employees. So I'm going to end this poll here, and Jeremy, if you'd like to go ahead and take the screen, there we are, and go ahead and take over here.
Sure. Give me one moment. Let me get it up, and I will share it. Okay. Whoops. Sorry, give me one moment, guys. Okay, and all right. I'm guessing you guys can all see the screen.
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name's Jeremy, and I am with Parknav, and I always like to start by telling a story about how Parknav came to be. And you know, personally, I love parking. However, my girlfriend at the time did not love parking so much. Sometimes she would be looking for parking for over 30 minutes at a time just to find a parking space near where I live. So I teamed up with some incredible people and we created Parknav. And Parknav is this. Oops. So Parknav uses artificial intelligence to know where you can find open on-street and off-street parking in real time. As Kevin mentioned, it's the only scalable solution, works for every street in the city, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for all types of on-street parking, whether it's free, paid, or permit, as well as off-street parking. And most importantly, we do this without a need for any dedicated parking sensors. So this here's kind of a little bit more of an overview of what we offer. We refer to two different types of parking data. There's static data, which in the case of on-street parking, think of the restrictions, the permanent restrictions that are along the curve, for example, where it's illegal to park, where it's free, where it's paid. We provide all of this information, including the pricing, the times, the days, and things like that. We do the dynamic on-street parking availability in real time. So we will tell you which streets have the highest probability of there being at least one open and available parking space at any given time. And then we also do the dynamic best area for on-street. So a use case example would be if you're planning to go to a restaurant, we can show you the areas with the highest chance of finding parking and you can make plans around that. We also do off-street. So similar to the static on-street, for off-street, we have the locations, the parking types, the times, the prices, and the dynamic off-street parking availability, such as the occupancy. What are the chances of finding a space? And finally, we have the turn-by-turn voice-guided parking navigation. And I'm going to actually show you an example of this later on in the presentation. But really, when you're navigating to a destination, the most important thing isn't necessarily arriving at the destination. It's finding parking once you arrive there. And what we can do is we can extend that route to show you the optimal route around that destination where you're most likely to find parking. So this data is extremely valuable to various industries, especially the automotive industry, who take our data and can put it directly into the infotainment system of the car. So now not only are you navigating from A to B, but really we're going to show you parking once you get there. Another example is with Deutsche Telekom, and this is the case study we're going to review today, where they decided they wanted a mobile parking payment application. A lot of cities now are doing pay by phone, where you can pay by your phone. But what they did is they took our data to enhance their solution so that you can find parking before you pay for it, so that it's the full find, park, and pay experience. And then finally, we work with companies like Siemens, who develop smart city dashboards so that cities can make smarter decisions specifically around parking. We have an incredible team, including our CEO, Professor Eyal Amir. He was one of the top 10 to look for in AI by the IEEE. He won the Arthur L. Samuel Award at Stanford for the top PhD thesis, and also is the recipient of the Career Award. Sergey Kozarenko, who's built big data applications for major banks. We have a few other very well-known data scientists and a much larger team. We also have multiple issued patents in the US, and we have some in the EU as well. And then we have incredible customers. And again, I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. So how does it work? Really what we're doing is we're getting data from various sources, from car manufacturers, so directly from the cars, telecommunication companies, mapping companies, insurance companies, car sharing companies. We even do our own ground truth data, and then we're able to bring unprecedented accuracy in knowing whether you can find open parking. So now let's talk about a case study. How this was applied in the real world. And I'm going to jump to Deutsche Telekom. In the US, they're known as T-Mobile. And they developed a mobile parking payment solution called Park Enjoy. Now, originally, or typically nowadays, whenever you're doing mobile parking payments, you find your own parking space and then you pay. It's a great experience overall, and it's simple. You literally can just take out your phone, pay. You don't have to walk to a payment station, and this has changed how people park in a city, or at least how they pay for it. However, when Park Enjoy was looking to enter the market, specifically in Germany, it was already a very crowded market. There were many providers, and they needed to do something unique and different that gave them an edge among, from the competition by providing additional services that added value to the consumer. And so we wanted to turn something that was already great, and I represent that with a Tesla, and supercharge it. And I think that this is a good representation to give you, to make something that's already good even better. And so as we started, you're going to see a lot. This is a very busy image, but what's important to know here is that the first thing we do whenever we go into a city is we map out the restrictions of a city. And I'm going to show you a demonstration of this momentarily. But in Germany, for example, they have a program called Smart Parking, where all of the cities provide their parking regulations, and then they give those to the payment providers. Well, I guess I'm sure it's no surprise, a lot of times they're wrong, and it's outdated, and it's expensive to do. So we go in and we found that sometimes over 40% of those restrictions are incorrect. So we go out and we map those ourselves. And I'm going to show you that right now with a little video. And this is technology of ours. It's GDPR compliant. But as this is us driving one time, we can identify all of the signs on a street. So as we are driving, we are actually mapping this out. And as we get closer, I'll show you to a sign. You will see that it identifies, for example, no stopping or parking is allowed. We're actually even able to go beyond that and read what is underneath the sign as well. So this is one-time driving. We can map all of this out. And this is the first of its kind technology. And secondly, we're also doing quality checks on our real-time availability. So this is just an example representation. So you can see how this looks as some of our technology. And now I will show you what is the end result of this. Well, here it is. We actually map out all of those restrictions on a map. We know where parking is not allowed, where it's free, where you have to pay, if you need a permit, if there is EV parking, and also disabled parking. So really, it maps it out, and we have our own editor to do this. We also supply this to cities so that way they can also make some modifications and see what the output of a city could look like if they make changes, or even make a digital output. As Dinesh kind of showed, there's a whole bunch of numbers. What is the visualization of this? We can actually visualize what all of these restrictions are. So this was the first step. Secondly, we then added the real-time availability, and this is just a snapshot of Amsterdam. In this map, this is our own representation of the availability, where green means there's a high chance of finding parking, orange a medium chance, or we say a fair chance, red means a low chance, and black means there is no legal parking on that street at all. To the right, you'll see a visual representation of this in the Park Enjoy app, where they are only showing the green. They decided that they only wanted to show the high probability streets. And same thing with automakers. Sometimes they choose this as well, but this is how they chose to visualize it. And then you can also see there's a parking garage, and the parking zone is in blue. So first I showed you the restrictions so that we can map those out, the static restrictions. Then we put on top of that the dynamic real-time availability. But then we take it one step further. And what we then want to do is do the turn-by-turn voice-guided parking navigation. So on the right, and I'm going to show you a video of this in a moment, on the right, you're going to see the normal navigation in blue. This is if you're going from A to B to your destination. But as I mentioned before, the most important thing is really that you find parking once you get there. And so you'll see that additional pink route, which will then take you on the optimal streets where you'll find parking the quickest. And I'm going to show you a brief little video of this, of what this can look like. So forgive the little jerkiness. This is recorded actually from a tablet. And this is what we did for an oil company that's in the Benelux area. So as you're looking, you can see this is just, right now it's taking you on the normal route. This can take into account traffic. It's just normal navigation, the normal navigation that you would do. It's voice guided, turn by turn. This can be implemented into an application or directly into the car itself. This is just has its own user interface that we created for a mobile app. So as you'll see, it is reaching the destination. It'll make a couple of final turns here. And then once you reach the end of the normal route, what it then does is it will notify you that you are now beginning the parking navigation and to start looking for parking. And it'll actually take you turn by turn on that route and learn. So for example, if you don't find parking on the first time, it will learn in real time and update that route. But we do believe that that this will find you parking fairly quickly. So in essence, it's optimizing your search. So I'll leave that one there. So now, once this was all said and done, we enhanced this experience. No longer are you just parking and paying, but you're finding parking. You're doing that. You're knowing the restrictions. You're knowing where there's open parking. You're navigating there. You're then being able to park and then pay. So it's the full experience from getting in your car until you get out of your car. It's no longer just paying for the parking. But there's more. And we took this even one step further. So in some cities, they wanted to increase the accuracy from just 85% and go all the way to 95%. And how did they do that? They came to us, and this is in Hamburg. They came to us and said, you know what? We want to put some sensors in just because we want the data, but we don't want to put a sensor in every spot. We don't even want to put 100 sensors. We want to put only a few. And what we were able to do was look at all of the streets and determine which streets should have sensors, how many sensors they should have, and where they should be placed. So this technically even took this even further, and this is going to be in even more cities as time goes by. So right now, in the Park Enjoy app, it's available in 130 cities between North America, 130 cities in Germany specifically. But we offer now over 1,000 cities between North America and Europe, and can scale to up to 10 cities in as little as 2 months using the technology I showed you. I should also mention that this technology has been tested in Japan with a major telecommunication company. They have micro lots instead of on-street parking. And they tested to see, could we predict whether there would be an open parking space in those lots? They had the real data. They gave us data from before, and we were able to get over 95% accurate there. So we already showed the technology can work. So what are we looking for? I mean, we're always looking for customers in the Japanese market, sales channels, data partnerships. Data is the new oil, and we are digesting quite a bit of it, which is what builds our availability. So please, if you have any questions, happy to take those later on or during the panel. Feel free to reach out to me, yeah, in the future. So thank you, guys.
Awesome, Jeremy. Thank you for your presentation. So we're going to go ahead and initiate another poll here, and I can remind you guys to keep adding questions. I see we have some good ones coming in. So let me get to the second poll here. If I can pull this down. And we'll go ahead and start. You should see this poll on your screen now, and I'm going to go ahead and start to introduce our next speaker. So our final presenter is Christopher Vic Hansen, who is co-founder and CEO of Spare Labs, which is based in Vancouver, British Columbia. Spare Labs enables the future of mobility and empowers transit agencies to embrace it. Through Spare's platform, they enable cities and transit agencies to plan, launch, operate, and analyze on-demand microtransit. Christopher is leading a technology-driven team aiming to accelerate the shift towards efficient and accessible mobility by enabling anyone to plan, launch, and analyze a smart transportation network in seconds. A native of Norway, Christopher moved to Canada to pursue his bachelor's degree in integrated engineering at the UBC in 2010. So let me finish this poll here. And go ahead, Christopher, if you want to take I think you've got the screen here.
Thanks so much.
Okay, go ahead.
Cool. All right, let me share my screen here. Thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate you guys taking some time off your, I would imagine, pretty busy days. Can you see my screen at all? Yes. Can I get a yes or a no?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Thank you for the feedback. Cool, all right, good stuff. Yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining this short little webinar. So I'm gonna chat a little bit about what microtransit is and how we at Spare is helping really shape the future of public transit using these concepts. But first, a little bit about myself. So I'm based in Vancouver, Canada, and Spare, we have deployments across the world. We mostly deal with North America, but we've also done some projects in Japan and in Europe. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But back to me as a person here in Vancouver. So, Vancouver is a very lovely city if none of you guys have been here before. But the problem with Vancouver, and specifically in my situation, is that I don't actually own a car. So, on a day-to-day basis, I need to actually choose how I get around, right? And sometimes it makes sense for me to walk. Sometimes it makes sense for me to take the bus. Sometimes it makes sense for me to take a taxi, bike. There's all of these solutions, right? And it's really, how we use these different solutions that will really shape the way we move in our cities of tomorrow. And, using these forms of shared mobility, which I'm really a consumer of, is really the only way to fight the congestion and actually make it so that the cities of tomorrow are slightly better than the cities of today and slightly more livable. One of the things that we are really in what we are doing on, which is mostly working with cities and public transit agencies, is that transit agencies have clearly started shifting from being kind of the normal transit agency or bus company where they're just running, you know, vehicles and routes and that's it, to really becoming and morphing into something that they say is basically a mobility agency, where their role is really at how can we best move people from A to B, because that is really at the task at hand. The task of these agencies might not actually be on just running vehicles and routes. Their task is really how do we move people from A to B in the most efficient manner, depending on the time of day and the location and the need of the trip, etc., etc. And we're seeing this really kind of get up and running in many places in Europe and in North America, to the point where some of our partners, our city partners, have actually changed the mission statement of their transit agency to be what they call a mobility agency. And one of the things that these mobility agencies are really considering right now and really rolling out is this concept called microtransit. And maybe you haven't really heard about this concept before, but basically what microtransit is, it's basically, you know, if you mix a taxi with a bus, so you get almost like a demand responsive service that where you have shared rides, but it operates based on when you actually want it to operate. So you're leaving the scope of having large buses, you're leaving the scope of having designated routes and designated schedules, and really going into kind of this future of almost like ride hailing for public transit, where riders really get picked up and dropped off wherever they want, right? And there's no more waiting at the bus stop, and you really know when the bus arrives because you can kind of track it and make sure that you get on the way and you get to your destination much faster. And in addition to that, it's all shared trips. So instead of having one vehicle for one passenger, you know, you have one vehicle, similar to a bus, you have one vehicle for many passengers. So you do multiple pickups, multiple drop-offs, and make sure that the system is efficient. The way that we approach this is that we built a cloud-based software as a service platform to really enable bus operators and rail operators and mobility agencies and even large corporates and multiple of other type of organizations, move them into this new world of mobility, really by facilitating a transition to safe, sustainable, and efficient on-demand mobility. And you know what we are really coming to this equation with is really the fact that this is all data driven, which is, you know, incredible to see how little data driven a lot of the mobility, especially here in North America, how that happens. Also looking at how can we build the best multimodal service, you know, because it doesn't always make sense to just ride the train, right? You need to get to the train station. So how do you actually bridge these different services in order to offer as multimodal of a service offering as possible? And this is really kind of what we bring to the table of bringing something that can be fairly specific to the rider group. You know, if you are in a wheelchair, then, you know, we can efficiently dispatch a vehicle that might have wheelchair accessibility. If you have some other form of eligibility in how you need to move around, then that can be really customized to each rider group. Our technology works in kind of three different ways. You have the core operational product, which basically is called Spare Launch. You can see it on the left-hand side there. And this is really where you can kind of design these networks and, you know, add vehicles and really see on a live map what is happening and see people booking trips and trips being facilitated and drivers driving around, and really the core operational product that powers millions of trips per year all over the world. Then, you know, one of the things that we often get asked about is how do you best design a on-demand mobility system? And that is really where our work with what's called Spare Realize comes in, which is a full suite of simulation tools that makes it possible for you to understand, you know, how many potential riders or passengers may you get in a specific area? You know, how many vehicles will you need? And, you know, what is the potential of this service in the beginning and after some time? And what is the kind of ROI that you should be looking at tracking for these services? So we've done a lot of work in looking at just from a simulation perspective, a common use cases. You know, before we launch in a new area, we would then run simulations to understand, you know, what is the best zone, how many vehicles, how many trips should we anticipate, etc., etc. And then the final product that we offer is what's called Spare Analyze. And Spare Analyze is an analytics tool that really sits on top of this operational tool, where you can really track, you know, how much is the rider volume increasing? Where are the different rides actually happening? How much fare revenue were you able to capture in any given time perspective? But also, this tool is also used to generate reporting that can be sent to, you know, the central government or other entities that might require reporting as part of their mandate. So it's a complete turnkey software solution to really run these on-demand systems. One of the things that we often, you know, is often looked at is really, you know, looking at only the technology that's required to run these systems. But the way that we really like to frame this conversation is really looking at how can we combine great technology with great operation? Because, you know, it doesn't really matter how great the technology is if it's really poorly run. You know, one example that I can bring up that's kind of maybe a little bit more familiar is that, you know, you might have seen there might be, you know, vehicle location that you can track on your phone when the next fixed route bus is going to be there. But, you know, if the fixed route bus is really poorly operated, it doesn't really give you a warm sense of wanting to use that service. So we really see, you know, our piece in the technology space being part of a much larger picture that really involves around operations. And we really see it as working really well with the operator as understanding of how can we best really combine both of these leverages to create an incredible service. To the point where, you know, we actually travel around the world to actually try out these services and work with drivers. You can actually see one of the drivers that has been driving for us in Dallas. His name is Terry, and you know, we work with the drivers on the ground to really understand, you know, what are the key challenges that is also seen from the ground, because there's only so much we can learn from having kind of this high level view. We also really need to, you know, go and see the service and go and try the service in order to understand how can we better adjust our technology to make the operation as good as possible. When it comes to moving this microtransit systems forward, we're looking at a lot of different opportunities right now where we've launched what we called advanced microtransit services. And that is really taking this, you know, fairly straightforward concept to the next stage. One of the ways that we're looking at doing this is something called commingling. And what commingling means is that you're basically combining different groups of passengers into the same service and even into the same vehicle. And why you want to maybe do that is because that might be a way for you to really customize the service depending on the different use cases that you might want to solve. So one common use case is, for example, that, you know, for example, if it's an employee commuting service, that might be prioritized for a certain set of employees, and then the rest of the seats are available for the general public to use those and actually book a trip. So that in that way you can kind of prioritize the demand a little bit, and you can kind of customize the service much more, and you can also at the end of the day push more trips into each vehicle, which just means that the service is generally much more efficient. That's what we call commingling. So that's on the kind of the demand side of things. So when we look at the supply side of things, another thing that we have been working a lot on is what's called trip brokering. And that is really where you can take in all of these trips, and then you can broker the trips over to a multitude of different providers or different operators. It might be to a taxi company, it might be to a TNC like Uber or Lyft or somebody else. It might be to a city operated fleet, such as a paratransit fleet, or a contracted operator fleet, such as an on-demand fleet. So multiple ways you can actually broker out these trips in real time. Just want to highlight some of the deployments we've done. I want to start with the Dart GoLink service, which is one of the largest on-demand microtransit systems in the world. It's in Dallas in Texas, and it's available in 15 different areas around the transit agency network. And really the whole purpose of this system, which is an on-demand microtransit system, is to take people to and from the train station. So, I mean, as I'm sure the group can probably imagine, Dallas in itself is not the most dense area in the world. So there's a lot of density issues that really has made up that in order to capture wider demand around the train stations, there has come a need to provide different service offering around the train station in order to get people to and from the train station. And that's really where this Dart GoLink service comes in. What's kind of interesting about that is that it's completely integrated into a mobility as a service app that's built by the transit agency called GoPass, and it makes it super seamless to both pay, plan, and book trips all within one unified interface. And we also use trip brokering here in order to broker out these trips to different providers depending on the different business logic has been set. It's a super unique system that I would highly recommend you to Google afterwards if you're more interested in this topic. The second one I wanted to highlight is a newer service that we started operating fairly recently. And what's really special about this one, which is in Lincoln, Nebraska, the capital of Nebraska, it's what I discussed earlier about this commingling of different rider groups. And what we're commingling here is a microtransit service and a paratransit service. So with the same fleet of vehicles, they can offer two different types of services to two different passenger groups. So on one side, on the microtransit side, it's more for the general public. It's kind of like where me and you could easily book a trip from going to A to B, really anywhere within Lincoln, Nebraska. The second one, the paratransit service, is more for people with disabilities or elderly community or other people that would normally have a hard time using the regular bus network that exists in Lincoln. And the really interesting thing about this specific service is that usually you see that the microtransit service and a paratransit service are completely segmented apart, meaning that they have their own vehicles and their own fleet in order to provide that. What's really unique about this specific service is that what we've done here is that with the same fleet of vehicles, they can actually offer two different types of services that are offered to different sets of passengers that have different business logic in each of them. So it's a really, really interesting in that capacity. The final one I wanted to highlight is a service that we help power in Japan called the No Route service. And it's really the first on-demand transit system of its kind available in Japan, really tailored toward the Japanese market. And it's really meant as a first last mile connection piece where it's taking you from the services, these on-demand buses that exist in this place called Island City, which is in Fukuoka. and it connects you from this island to the local train station and makes it a super seamless connection of taking you to and from the train station. And also, it's also available for the residents of this island city to be, moved around the different places within the island. So it's a kind of an interesting hybrid approach where it's both for connecting to the train station, but also as a more local transportation system within this island city. One of the really interesting things that we did specifically for the Japanese market is, which has also greatly benefited the work we do in the rest of the world, is we integrated navigation for super accurate side of road routes in Japanese geographies, meaning that we will always guarantee that the vehicle stops on the correct side of the road and make sure that there's no need for the passenger to jaywalk across the street. So that was a really interesting thing where we had to actually build our own navigation system to actually make that possible. Because for a navigation system like the more normal ones out there, like Google Maps or Waze or whatnot, they don't have that capability of always guaranteeing the correct side of the road. The second thing we did is we integrated with one of these Japanese IC card providers. The one we integrated with is called Nimoka, and it basically means that you can enter in your Nimoka card on the app that the rider or the passenger would use, and then they would be credited some points on the Nimoka system in order to facilitate an easier transfer to the rest of the transit system or the rail system there. The last thing we did is we developed something which we call optimized stops, which is basically a brand new way of facilitating pickup and drop-offs, where we both optimize the route that people are, that the vehicle is driving on, but we also in addition to that, we would optimize the specific stop that the passenger would be dropped off or picked up by. And while that may sound like a fairly easy small thing to do, this has actually brought the efficiency of this service tremendously up, because we are able to basically reduce detours within the existing routes in the system. So it really pushes this envelope of providing super efficient on-demand transportation. So thanks everyone for following along my presentation. I'll turn it back to the webinar host.
Okay, thank you, Christopher, for your presentation, and to all of our speakers for excellent presentations. I'm going to initiate a couple of final polls here. So if my audience, if you'd like to add a couple questions, we would welcome that. So let me get to the next. Oops. Get to the next poll here. So you should see one poll on your screen here. And as we get ready to move along to our panel session, we've got a lot of great questions that have actually come in, so I'll share those with you momentarily. I would also like to let you know that we are planning to have Jconnect webinars in the next couple of months on the topics of robotics, AI software, blockchain, medical device technology, and cybersecurity. And we hope you can join those webinars as well. So please keep an eye out for email announcements or check the JETRO USA webpage for events. So let me start this final poll here. And then we'll move to the next. So you should see a final poll here. And thank you again for my audience here today for answering all the polls during the session today. So I'll give this a second here. Question answers. Okay, so thank you. So if I can get everybody on here, I think we got our speakers ready here. So here's a question for all speakers. The smart city activity in Japan is mostly led by big companies and government bodies. what do you think the biggest barriers for tech startups from the US or from Canada or from Europe, wherever, to collaborate with these big traditional organizations in Japan? And just to add to that, I know there was another comment about language barrier too. So Christopher, do you want to start off with that since you have some experience in Fukuoka, and then we'll move through?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, yeah, the Japanese market is quite interesting in that way, but I wouldn't say that it's that different from any other international market. I would say, you know, whenever we evaluate an international market, we really try and see, you know, is there local players that we may collaborate with, just because it is, from our experience, at least in what we provide, there are always some slight differences. We have had a really great partnership with Mitsubishi Corporation, which is obviously one of the major trading companies in Japan, and that has been really good for us to really understand that market. So I think providing more opportunities like that for connecting North American startups with Japanese companies like that could be a great way for collaborating and really start having these more, I wouldn't say face-to-face conversations in these times, but, you know, these more one-on-one conversations, let's call it like that.
Dinesh, you want to hop in here? I know you've had some experience in Japan as well.
Yeah, well, I think Christopher is right. But more importantly, since I've been developing Japan market for quite a number of years, the past few years, I think, has transformed quite a bit in a way that more and more Japanese are looking outward, more excited about partnering with international companies, including startup. And I think another thing is that the organizations in Japan is transforming from a more systems, more hardware into a more data, more software related organizations. And with that, I think they understand that it requires a little bit more of a partnership with outsiders. For me, my experience has been that you just need to be patient. Patience is the number one priority you need to have. That's what the candle comes in a lot, because every time it's about waiting for the right moment. The other thing is also about having the right partner. Again, in various markets, it's all about having the right partner. Having the right partner, be honest, be transparent. I think it's really both parties, as I mentioned earlier in my presentations, right? This thing that we are working on, the whole smart cities, climate change and energy, is not about a single organization or a single party, right? So what I really think is that both parties has to be transparent, has to be understandable, and having a shared purpose. Then I think we can move quite a bit further.
Jeremy?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, we're a little different in that we haven't formally entered the Japanese market yet. We've had communications with companies, but I'm going to piggyback on what Dinesh said. There's two things that are important for us. You know, what's unique about us is we do not need any partner per se or government entity to enter a market, which is kind of our unique value proposition. But that being said, we need data. And data is, you know, as I mentioned, it's kind of the oil. And when you're dealing outside of the West, whether it's Europe or North America, it's a little bit, with the language and also the different cultural aspects, it's a little bit different in terms of negotiating and finding these data sources and developing those partnerships, which kind of leads me into the second piece, which Dinesh also said, is finding the right partner. Because if we do enter that market, we will want someone who's familiar with the market, who has some of these relationships. It may be the customer themselves, but that will kind of smooth out some of these rough spots, especially with a company that has not done this before.
Jeremy, I'll keep you on here. How has COVID-19 and the pandemic, how has this affected your business in different cities, I guess you could say?
Sure. So in terms of our business, I mean, this is very different than the actual patterns of people parking. In terms of our business, obviously we've shifted online. I travel 3 times a month internationally myself, and you know, with conferences and things like that. So our business, the way we conduct business, is a little more different. But now, kind of, I think maybe it was geared more toward the parking habits of people, And we're seeing quite a significant change. There's a lot more parking available, especially in those CBD commercial areas. And I think that this kind of goes without saying. We actually have a graph, or not a graph, a visualization. I could show, I don't know if I could show it now or later, but parking is generally more available, and the peak parking times have changed. Whereas before it was, I think, around 2 p.m., for example, in San Francisco, and now it is much later in the day. So it's changed.
And Christopher, how about COVID-19 and your business model? How are things affected with
Sure.
different users using, transit and things like that? And I know public transit is obviously taken a big hit in countries.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's no surprise to any of the participants here that have been outside on the streets in the past couple of months. Public transit isn't super heavily used. So it has obviously, most of our transit partners have obviously been highly affected by this pandemic. However, it has at the same time greatly accelerated this shift of them having to rethink in a different way, because really they've realized that the tool that they've had at their disposal, which is really just like, providing a bus on a fixed schedule, on a fixed route, then that tool is not maybe the best tool at all times when things are dynamically changing like they've done in the past few months. So we've actually seen an increase of business for our sake, which is kind of interesting, since the industry that we operate have had such a big impact on ridership and whatnot.
And Dinesh, do you have any comments on COVID-19 and how it's affecting your business?
Yeah, on our side, we do see so the first couple of months was kind of slowed down, like March, February, March, but then suddenly we got quite a number of interest in starting in April and May, mainly because, as I said in my presentations, majority of the people, operators are working remote side, and IT team are very much limited in both resources and access to the main network. So they have to start rethinking, how do I support my business units and how do I provide the right data? I don't have the time, or we don't have the time to rewrite all the APIs and all these things. So suddenly our platform becomes one of the ways that allows them to just dump every data into it, share it to the right business units, and allow the business units to start developing new business opportunities. So on that side, we actually got a lot of requests. The past 2-3 months, really supporting organizations to start rethinking how they can support their internal business units. Now, I'm not talking about collaborations with external parties. I'm purely talking about supporting internal business units to collaborate as well as to develop their businesses.
And if I could add one more thing, there's different organizations. Some organizations have used COVID as a means to, they've scaled back because it's adversely affecting their business, whereas other businesses have used this as an opportunity to drive innovation. So that once this whole pandemic is over, they are immediately back in the game, I guess the best way to put it, and have a new technology that they could supply rather than playing catch up. So it just depends on the organization as well.
Okay, Jeremy, here's another question directly for you here on Parknav parking availability. Is this available through an entire city, or is it just like in a central business district and other high traffic areas, or?
So whenever we go into a city, we're very much customer driven. And so the first thing we do is the CBD. That's the very first thing, just because those are the hard to park areas where there is consistent turnover in parking. That being said, we can do the entire city. This technology is geared that we can drive through once to get the restriction information, and then we have all of this real-time data coming in that covers pretty much the entire city, an entire state, or an entire country. So in essence, we can do both. It's just that typically we see from the customer side, which is businesses, they typically want the CBD.
Okay, and Dinesh, I think you may have seen this in the questions. Does Adapt do anything differently on the data collection end?
Yeah, we do. Actually, I have one thing I want to just quickly show, so this way it has a clearer.
Sure.
So basically, when can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So when data comes in, again, any type of data, geo-related data, CSV or whatever, any data that comes in, we do automatically categorizations, cleansing, and data entitlement. What that means is that we even tag the ownership of that data source, whether it belongs to a different business units or whatever. And then automatically we create the API that allows them to use it for development, or if they are used for some tools like Tableau, ArcGIS, or Power BI, we have the connectors directly on that. So what that means is that for companies who already have a lot of data, what they have to do is basically just map it over to a platform like ours, and then they will automatically get all the information that they can do without spending time to analyze, without spending time to do much development. Again, going back to what we really do is really giving a profile to a data. So imagine that you have a piece of flat file, like a CSV file or just data source. Suddenly you have this whole entitlement onto it. And that's what we help on that part. Hope that answers the questions.
Yes, thank you. And Christopher, we have a question here for Spare. What companies are your competitors, or is it a company like VIA?
Yeah, correct. I think I answered that in the Q&A. Yeah, there's a number of companies that do similar things to us. VIA is one of them. We do provide something that's a little bit different, but they also provide on-demand microtransit. Correct.
Okay. And let me get back to this other question here. This is just a general question. Can you? I think we've kind of discussed this, but with language differences in different countries and cultural differences, cultural barriers, how have you overcome these in foreign markets?
Maybe I'll start. So we have two things that we do. A lot of the markets that we operate in, we have someone local because there's a couple of different reasons for that. First off, there's the language barrier, but there's the cultural barrier. There's many different things. Perception is another big one. So we really try to have a native speaker or someone who could speak it fluently on our team just to help facilitate that conversation, because otherwise it puts a burden on a potential customer or partner, and we don't want to do that. So our goal is to make it as simple as possible, and we'll do whatever we need to do to find someone who can speak on our behalf.
You know what? It's interesting that in the past, whenever like I said, I go to Japan quite often, almost every month, and I go there. Majority of the people that I know is very nice. We meet and we talk about businesses, and then sometimes we go out for a drink or coffee or things. But more importantly, I find that with this COVID thing, as both Jeremy and Christopher mentions, right? We need to start innovating. We really need to start rethink. And I realized that I actually get more on Zoom calls these days for the past 3 months. Almost like every week I get on, hey, do you want to do a course? And I get a ping, hey, I'm free right now, because many people are at home. And we start talking about not just, can you do this business? Can you do it? It's almost like a general thing. We are facing this problem. What do you think? Or things like it's more like a shared thing, because everyone seems to be trying to find ways to move forward. And since there's no like one answer, I think it stimulates this. So I don't know if this will really help going forward, but I see this as a way that allows people to start rethinking that innovations discussions doesn't need to be like, hey, let's set up a meeting, let's go out. I still enjoyed it, don't get me wrong, but it can move much faster just because of the medium that we have these days.
Christopher, would you like to add to that?
I guess I just want to reiterate Jeremy's point there. I mean, if there's anything we've learned, is that you got to have some local knowledge. I guess from my side, we kind of got that firsthand, where a lot of the business that we developed in Europe is in northern Europe. And, you know, me having that kind of cultural knowledge, language knowledge, even though they speak like incredibly well English, it's still kind of that, some familiarity that you want to provide. And I think that definitely exists in the Japanese market. And up until now, we've been very grateful to work very closely with Mitsubishi Corporation, kind of bridge that gap. But we do have seen that it's useful for us to have some local Japanese speakers on the team as well. So we actually just brought on someone who's Japanese, who speaks the language fluently, in order to better bridge that gap as we start expanding in the Japanese market.
Okay, so one of the major concerns from critics of smart city projects is data privacy and the Big Brother surveillance state. What is being done or needs to be done to address these critical issues for countries like the US or Canada, Japan, EU?
Oh, this is a
Anybody
big
want to jump on that?
Yeah, you know what? Since we're getting a lot of movement data, first and foremost, we need to be GDPR compliant. This has kind of become the gold standard. Unfortunately, the US does not have those protections in place as of right now at all. So we have to adhere to the strictest of standards where we operate. And then there's the big question of who owns what data. Who owns, if you drive a car, who owns the data that's being generated by the car? And we're going through a time right now where it's unclear. Automotives are actually saying they own the data, whereas in the future, that may not be the case, especially as we get into 5G, where there's going to be much more data that's being passed through the car and onto another solution. So at least with us, we just adhere to GDPR as a data processor, which we believe is the strictest standard. And we are following regulations very closely wherever we operate.
Dinesh, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I agree. I think there are a lot of different compliance out there, and there are a lot of tools. We are one of them, but there are a lot of tools that ensure privacy, compliance, and all these things. I always said that, well, privacy and compliance are the highest priority that people should think about. But beyond that, let's really start thinking about what you can do with that, right? One of the reasons that we started our business is my co-founder was in a car accident, and he was in ICU for a number of hours, and then his wife has to be in the surgery. And all he wanted to do was to find answers to what happened. Why? Because it was a very sudden, someone hit them. And what happened? He has to go back to his SD card. He has to get the police report. He has to look at whether there were cameras on the thing. And within those few months that he was trying to recover, he has to go in and find all these side of evidence, right? So again, going back to the point is, what are we doing the data for? And what are the benefits that we are benefiting? And then from that point of view, we can work back into how do we ensure privacy? How do we ensure compliance? If we start thinking about the barriers, we can go forever into writing reports and all these things, right? But we will still be sitting in there. I think that's the point. And the last thing is, if you don't even have good quality data, why bother to even think about compliance and all these things, right? But if you have good quality data that you can offer, then talk about compliance, business models, and all these things.
Christopher, any comment?
Yeah, I mean, we adhere to all of the local regulations when it comes to data privacy. As Jeremy mentioned, probably one of the more stricter regulations out there is GDPR, which we have tackled firsthand in terms of being compliant with. This is a balancing act. It's on one side, you want to provide all of this data and make it, a super nice experience to live in the city and create these smart cities. But at the same time, you want to kind of keep that data as secure and private as possible, and have that privacy act as much as possible. I do think to a certain degree that we should maybe leave the privacy up to the user who own the data, right? So I should, in theory, be able to own all of the data that I produce with all of the tools and technologies that I use on a daily basis. How we get there, that's kind of an open question. I think we need another startup for that.
Jeremy, I think you mentioned data is the new oil. Given the high cost of data acquisition, and I know you guys have all kind of touched on this, how far are you on your path to profitability as companies with data?
We are profitable. There's different ways that we acquire data. It can be through the traditional licensing, but other times it can be through partners and customers. And this is where we see actually some of the more valuable, and when I say valuable, I'm not just talking in terms of dollar amount. I'm talking in terms of valuable to our solution, in terms of it being accurate. For example, when you deal with an automotive, there's different sensors in the car. Whenever we're supplying our solution to these automotives, and it is in their best interest to provide us with the best data that they have available to make their solution unique. And in a lot of times when we work with larger enterprises, they will say, listen, we're going to provide you with the data that we create, but we only want it to go in our solution because we don't want to give anyone else an edge. And so we do that as well. And in this case, it's more of a partnership customer relationship in addition to licensing. And in other cases, they give us data for everyone. It just really depends on the structure, but we do have access to this data. And this is one of our, I would argue, competitive advantages.
Christopher, Dinesh, do you want to tackle that question or?
Yeah, well, for us, it's slightly different. Just to give a little bit of flavor, in my past few years in my previous company, I have been buying and selling data for some of the largest mapping companies in the world, helping them to actually acquire data, including data in Chicago. So we work with some transit agencies and because everyone has sensors. So technically, most public companies have some sort of data that is valuable for some people, right? It's just a matter of connecting them. So there's a price to it, and there's definitely a demand to it. But again, there's two things that I always suggest companies who has data, right? One is look at how good your data is. Again, if it's bad quality data, it might not worth anything. Even we read a lot about like data is more valuable than oil. The other part is it's not about the raw data, right? It's what you can do with it. Look at Parknav, look at Spare, right? They are not talking about, hey, we sell data. They're talking about applications that makes people's life better. So I think those are kind of things that people should start thinking about across the board, right? From mobility companies, transportation companies, to constructions company, to even running a cities, right? How can we use data to make lives better for people?
Christopher, any comment?
Yeah, I mean, I would just highlight what Dinesh said there is, what we really focus on is how can we use data in the best way possible and build tools around data that might already exist. A lot of the data that we use, it's not like it's super expensive. This could be many cases, especially in North America, it's actually fully open, publicly available data that's produced by, census information and whatnot. And it's all about just what useful tools can we actually build around that data, because if we don't build any, we can have all the data in the world we want, but if there's no use case around it, then it's kind of useless, right? Then we're just worrying about keeping the data as private as possible and as secure as possible, but it has no use case beyond that. So when we look at how we use data, we look at why are we interested in this specific type of data, and how can it help our customers in furthering their transportation systems. We don't use data for the sake of using data. We do have clear use cases around it.
With that said, I do have another suggestions for big companies, especially in Japan. Just be open-minded, right? You guys have a lot of data. Be open-minded. As Christopher said, there's a lot of startups. Work with startups. Try to find ways to partner together. I teach entrepreneurship, so I always try to get my students to say that, hey, let's go out and just try to get it. But I think it's the other way also, right? For big companies, I know sometimes it's a little bit risky, but I think it's not that risky in a way that if we know what we are trying to do. And sometimes it's really difficult to do it internally because of a lot of operations involved. but that's where the collaborations between a startup and big enterprises can come in.
An interesting example of that is I was chatting with Volvo, the commercial truck company out of Sweden. And what they've done is that they obviously realize that the data that they might have on their trucks and whatnot might be really, really interesting for startups to build, tools and businesses around, right? But at the same time, there's this privacy concern, and them being a large enterprise pretty much makes it impossible for them to collaborate with startups. So what they did, they actually built this simulation suite that produces data independent of their customers. So it's almost kind of like where you can build tools where you can show value of integrating that data, but the data might just be completely simulated data. So there are some interesting ways of getting around that too, because what you want to get to at the end is like, if these startups are going to collaborate with these large enterprises, you got to produce some use cases for why that is relevant and why that is valuable. So there are some creative ways around that.
Dinesh, with partnership models, what do you think Japan needs to do, Japanese companies, Japanese governmental organizations, to kind of better work with foreign startups or foreign companies, when it comes to things like this?
Well, I'm sure we all know, right? Japanese companies, compared to others, they love to partner. You always hear like Toyota is partnering with SoftBank, Mitsubishi is partnering with these guys. They always love to partner, but unfortunately, they only love to partner when you are big enough. If big guys, let's work it, right? But I think we are in this stage where we need some new-minded people. We need innovation. So bring people along, right? My suggestion is, since they are so used to partnerships, why don't we bring people along with these partnerships? This is what I suggest. These forums, and I know that there are a lot of things happening in both Tokyo and Osaka, also bringing in some startups. There's still some disconnect, I have to say, with big organizations and startup. They're starting to have these like innovation managers and labs to do the bridge, but there's still some sort of identifying the opportunities, and then this what we call the hierarchy networks becomes very busy to entertain some of the opportunities. I think if we can start to rethink what that bridge could be, or even have it outside of that organizations, as Christopher said, create something first and then bring it back, it might be easier. Because for startups, we although usually we are very much willing to keep on dropping, because we are asked to every time fight back, but it comes to a point that if we are not going anywhere, we might also start losing patience. So I would say that for big companies, let's bring startup along. Let's do something, move forward. What we always say is reduce the frictions, increase the flow until a certain point, then bring back to an organizations. Then bringing immediately the idea to an organization and shut it down. I think that's what is needed.
Jeremy, I have another question for you here. I think Christopher's brought along a Canadian fan club here, because I've got a couple of questions here about when are you going to add Parknav to major cities in Canada?
When are we going to be in Canada? Well, we actually have many of the major cities in Canada. We have on our website, for example, some people said they didn't see them on our website. They didn't see countries. Yeah, we only offer a few to try, and it's very basic data on our website. But if a customer were to come to us and say, hey, we want Toronto, we want Vancouver, we have it. So it just, we're a B2B company where it can be embedded in an automotive or in a phone or in whatever, and then they enable that to be available for the consumer. So if you want it in Canada, raise your voice and we'll be there.
By the way, I used to live in Canada for a couple of years in Toronto. So technically, I can also be considered as Canadian for a couple of years.
Okay, we're getting short on time here. So, I wanted to point out one last question, and I'll let you guys give some final remarks. Why don't the three of you collaborate or even merge? Was one of the questions.
If only it were that simple, right?
That second point there, I'd love to talk about that one.
Listen,
that's going to be easy.
The way I see it, there's always room for collaboration, especially amongst startups, because we're agile, we're adaptable, and it's easier to work with the startup because really we're all in the same situation. So there's always that potential if there's relevance and there can be value created. So it just depends. Who knows?
And that's what's so nice about these opportunities like here, that it's also an opportunity for us as panelists to understand kind of what's the latest and greatest, and what are some interesting people working on these days. We might have like tunnel visions from day to day when it comes to our own stuff.
Yeah. No, I think collaborations comes from different forms, right? It doesn't have to be the traditional way of, hey, let's sit down, sign a contract, and then let's do it, right? As Jeremy mentions, a lot of their partnership is just, hey, you get a data, you just go and use it and develop your app, right? So I think people also need to start thinking about collaborations. Doesn't need to be like a tradition format. Let's meet up, let's do an investment, let's do a contract, or let's merge. Lots of ways that we can work together as long as we see a purpose that we can move forward.
Okay, well, I think we're about out of time here. So I want to thank you guys, Dinesh, Christopher,
Thank you.
Jeremy. You guys did a great job today, great presentations. I thank the audience for sticking around here to the end. We'll be sending you more information online after the event. So please look out for our next event announcements that'll be coming up shortly. So once again, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.